They found her lying face down in the dust, the baby still swaddled and crying weakly beside her. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and one boot had slipped off in the struggle. Blood trickled from her temple where the rifle butt had struck. More bruises blooming across her arms like dark violets. The baby, no more than a day old, had a soft trail of dried blood on her cheek from where her mother's nose had bled during the beating. The sun was unforgiving, burning away the morning fog and exposing her to the raw cruelty of the plains. The wagon tracks that had brought her here stretched on toward the horizon, fading into the harsh West Texas dirt. And behind her, the ranch house where she'd once been a wife, now just a silhouette in the shimmering heat. No one was coming back, they'd made that clear, but the eyes watching from the ridge above, dark, steady, and ancient, had seen everything. And where others turned away, he rode down. He didn't speak when he reached her. He only dismounted, lifted the baby first, then the mother, and carried them both across the dry earth like they were his own blood. That was the day the Comanche chief claimed a beaten woman and her daughter, and changed all their fates. Subscribe now, because tomorrow's story will haunt you even deeper. You'll need it. But before that, let me take you to the day it all began. She was beaten for birthing a girl, but a Comanche. Chief took them in. Genre, romantic Western drama. Tone, emotional, cinematic, tragic but hopeful narration. Style, third person, highly descriptive and immersive. There was a silence to Dust Creek that didn't come from peace. It came from judgment. The town sat low in a cradle of dry hills, all red dirt and wind-polished fences. Dust gathered in the corners of every porch, in the folds of dresses, in the creases of tired eyes. The church bell only rang on Sundays and deaths, and lately it had rung more for the latter. Folks spoke in hushed tones, especially when she passed by. Her name was Clara Rose. Once it had been spoken with pride. Now it was rarely said at all. She walked with a slight limp, her left leg not quite healed right after she fell from a horse as a child. People used to say it made her look delicate, even charming. But since her husband died in the war and left her with a baby in her belly and no man to speak for her, the townsfolk saw the limp as just one more sign of weakness. Or sin, depending on who was talking. She lived on the edge of town, in a one-room shack left to her by her father, a quiet blacksmith who drank more than he prayed. The house was small, built from hand-cut pine and desperation, and it groaned in the wind like it remembered better days. Clara tended a small patch of earth out back, coaxing tomatoes and beans from soil that didn't want to give. Chickens scratched around the fence line, and a gray mule stood in the barn, half blind and older than the town itself. Clara hadn't had a real conversation in months, not since the baby came. It was a girl. The midwife hadn't even looked her in the eye after delivering her, just cleaned her hands and said, "Well, God help you," before walking out into the dark. From then on, Clara noticed how the silence grew thicker when she entered the general store. Mrs. Allman, the shopkeeper's wife, would suddenly remember something in the back room every time Clara stepped inside. Children whispered behind barrels, calling her cursed. A widow who birthed a girl? Alone? No husband to name the child. The Lord's punishment, they said. That's what it had to be. Even Reverend Thorne stopped visiting. So Clara stitched baby, clothes in the candlelight, and fed her daughter broth made from scraps and wild herbs. She hummed songs no one else remembered and prayed in whispers, just in case God was still listening to her. The baby, whom she named June after her mother, smiled often, despite everything, and Clara smiled back. It was the only time her face softened. Sometimes at night, she would hold June against her chest and walk to the edge of her small porch, where the land dropped off into the wide prairie. Coyotes howled. The stars, thick as spilled sugar, blinked overhead. The wind was sharp and dry, brushing the edge of her nightgown, and in that endless dark, she would whisper things to the baby. "They don't know us," she'd say. "But one day they'll see. One day someone will see you and not look away." But it never felt true. One morning, the first of the real heat came rolling in, the kind that made sweat cling to your bones before breakfast. Clara strapped June to her chest and walked into town. She needed salt and flour, and she'd been putting it off for days. She kept her head down, skirts gathered in her fists, and avoided every eye that tried to find hers. A group of boys stood near the well, laughing loud enough for her to hear. "Don't stare too long, she might hex you," one said. "She's already cursed the child, look at it. Poor thing ain't even got a daddy." Another boy mimed a limp behind her back. Clara didn't flinch. Not this time. She just walked straight into the store, ignoring the looks, ignoring the bite of shame in her throat. She counted out every coin carefully. She didn't ask for credit, but when she came back outside, something was off. The mule was pulling against the post, ears back, eyes wild. 3 men, boys really just old enough to shave, stood near her wagon. They looked at her, then at the baby, and then they laughed. Funny, ain't it? How something so small can ruin a woman's whole life, one of them said. Clara turned to leave, but he grabbed her arm, rough and fast. "You think you can just walk around here like you belong?" he snarled. "You think anyone wants your bastard around their kids?" The slap came fast, stung the side of her face and knocked her bonnet to the dirt. She didn't scream. She just held June tighter, but the crying started anyway. Small, frightened wails against her chest. More people watched than helped. One man spat in the dirt and muttered, "Told her not to come back here." She gathered her bag, her bonnet, and climbed into the wagon with shaking hands. The mule pulled them home in silence. That night, under the candlelight, Clara sat beside the cradle and traced the curve of her baby's ear. "They don't want us here," she whispered, "but I swear, my girl, one day we'll find a place that does." The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying something new on the air. Smoke, horses, and a smell she couldn't quite place. But it wasn't from Dust Creek. It was coming from the wild beyond. If this is breaking your heart already, you haven't seen the worst yet. Tap subscribe. I've got another truth waiting for you tomorrow. The next morning, the wind felt different. It moved like a whisper through the cottonwoods near the creek, rustling leaves that hadn't spoken in weeks. The chickens were restless, and even the mule lifted its head like it sensed something out there in the wide, unforgiving land. Clara stood barefoot on the porch, June swaddled against her chest. Her cheek still bore the faint red mark from yesterday's slap, but she didn't touch it. She just watched the horizon as if it might bring her a sign, and it did. A figure on horseback moved across the prairie, slow and certain, like he belonged to it. He wasn't in uniform, nor in a town man's suit. He wore leather, worn but clean, and his long black hair was tied back in a low braid. A rifle sat across his back, and feathers danced from the reins of his horse. He didn't rush. He didn't raise dust. And when he reached the edge of her property, he stopped, just far enough to be respectful, just close enough to be noticed. Clara stiffened. She'd heard the rumors, Comanche sightings, whispers of raids, stories traded in gasps over church pews. The same people who called her cursed would say this was proof, but the man didn't threaten her. He dismounted without a word and dropped to one knee, not to pray, but to touch the earth. His fingers moved through the dust, slow and careful, before he looked up at her, dark eyes, steady. Old, not in years, but in something deeper. Clara didn't speak. She didn't move. He rose, nodded once, and turned to leave. It wasn't until he was nearly out of sight that she realized she'd been holding her breath. The next time she saw him, it was near the creek. She'd taken June out to wash clothes, the baby cradled in a woven basket, while Clara scrubbed at the fabric with aching hands. The water was cold even in spring, and her fingers had gone numb when she saw him again. This time he was on foot. He didn't come close, just stood on the opposite bank, watching her. Clara kept working. She didn't look up, but after a long silence, she heard it. "You scrub like you hate the cloth." His voice was deep, low, and carried a strange softness. Clara looked up sharply. It was the first time someone had spoken to her without pity or poison. She blinked. Maybe I do. He said nothing more. Just gave a small, knowing smile and walked back into the trees. From then on, she saw him more often. At a distance, sometimes at dawn, sometimes at dusk, always watching, never intruding. It was weeks before she learned his name, Chief Tocho, son of Running Horse, a Comanche leader who had once made treaties with the army and then broke them when the treaties betrayed his people. He was feared, revered, and most of all misunderstood. But Clara didn't fear him, not the way others did. One day, when the wind turned hot again and thunder rolled across the far mountains, she found him waiting near her barn. June had a fever, and Clara's nerves were thin. She didn't have the strength for questions. Tocho didn't offer any. He simply stepped forward and handed her something, a bundle of wild sage and ground willow bark. For the child, he said, "Boil it, not too long." She stared at him. "Why are you helping me?" His expression didn't change. Because no one else is. What if someone saw you for who you are, not what you carry? Subscribe. One day, that story might be yours too. The townsfolk noticed. Whispers turned to mutterings, mutterings, to accusations. "That Injun's been sniffing around the widow's place," one man spat at the saloon. "I always said she was strange. Maybe she's one of them." Next thing you know, she'll be marrying into a tribe and raising that girl to scalp us in our sleep. Clara felt the stares more than she heard the words. They came heavy, like storms just out of sight. One afternoon, Reverend Thorne himself came to her porch. He didn't sit. Clara rose. "I fear you're walking into sin's open arms." She met his gaze with a calmness she didn't feel. "I fear I've walked through worse." He left without blessing her, but Tocho kept coming. Not daily, not predictably, like the wind, present when needed, gone when not. He brought her wood when hers ran low, herbs when June's cough deepened, stories sometimes, in broken English, about rivers that ran red with buffalo, of stars that told the names of ancestors. They didn't touch, not once. But she started leaving out a second cup of coffee on the porch railing. Some mornings it was gone, empty and warm. Other mornings, untouched, but beside it a feather or a stone shaped like a heart. She didn't know what to call what they were building. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something more fragile, like lighting a candle in a windstorm and hoping it held. But inside her, a flicker returned. She sang to June louder. She brushed her own hair again. She started sewing dresses from scraps not for survival but for beauty. Something in her was waking, something in him already had. It was near the end of spring when the betrayal came. The land was greening in patches, the prairie waking from winter like a wounded animal unsure of trust. Clara had begun to hope, just a little. She smiled more. She'd started building a small fence around the bean patch. Tocho had brought her cedar posts, and they worked on them together in long, quiet afternoons, sometimes without a single word. But Dust Creek doesn't forgive what it doesn't understand. It started with a child's lie. A boy from town, Clem Allman's youngest, had seen Tocho ride past Clara's home at dusk. The boy told his father he saw the Comanche man holding the baby, rocking her, kissing Clara's hand. By the time the rumor reached the sheriff, it had turned into something far more dangerous. "He's got her under some kind of savage spell," Mrs. Allman hissed at the church steps. "She's giving the child to them, selling her for feathers and magic," someone else said. "They'll breed the next generation of outlaws and raiders right under our noses." It was decided without her presence that the town needed to intervene. They came at dawn, 3 men, armed and righteous. Clara was still half asleep. June nestled against her chest when the front door was kicked open and slammed against the wall. She screamed before she even saw them. The sheriff was first through, face hard and flushed. "You're coming with us." Clara backed away, shielding June with her arms. What are you doing?" "Harboring a known savage, endangering your child. You think we don't see what's been going on? I've done nothing wrong. Don't lie." The youngest deputy, Tom Haver stepped forward, grabbing her by the arm so hard it left a bruise instantly. "We know he's been here. We know he touched the baby. He helped us. He brought medicine when June was sick." They ignored her. They pried June from her arms, the baby wailing loud and shrill. Clara screamed and thrashed, but it didn't matter. The world blurred into fists, boots, and rope. They dragged her into town like a criminal. The townsfolk gathered fast. Word traveled quicker than wildfire when it carried blood and scandal. Clara was tied to the post outside the saloon. The sun burned down on her exposed skin as she bled from her mouth and cheek. Someone had thrown eggs. Someone else spat on her dress. The sheriff read charges that weren't written on paper, just born of fear and hate. She consorted with a savage, put her child at risk, corrupted the peace of Dust Creek. No trial, no defense, only shame. June had been taken to the Reverend's wife, who clutched the infant like she might catch a sickness from her. Clara, lips swollen and vision blurred, lowered her head. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was cursed. Maybe her love, her trust, was poison. That night, long after the crowd scattered, she was locked in the old jailhouse, alone with a tin cup and splinters for company. She tried to sleep, but all she saw was June, arms outstretched, crying. Something inside her cracked. By morning, Clara was gone. She'd broken the latch with a rusted rod, stolen a mule from behind the stable, and ridden north toward the ridge. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get far enough away not to be found. The land turned wild the deeper she went. Brush tangled around her ankles, the wind colder, unforgiving. A storm brewed in the distance, and then the mule collapsed. So did Clara. She staggered into a snow-dusted clearing, her skirts torn, feet bleeding. The wind screamed through the trees. Her body finally gave in, folding beneath a dead pine, where she clutched a piece of her baby's blanket and let the dark take her. When Tocho found her, it was nearly dawn. He had tracked the blood. Small, drops like fallen berries, and the bent branches she didn't know she'd left behind. He didn't call her name. He just knelt beside her, placed 2 fingers at her throat and sighed at the weak thump of her heart. He didn't cradle her like a lover. He built a fire, slow and methodical, laid her near it, covered her with a hide from his own horse. Boiled, snow for water. When she finally stirred, she didn't open her eyes. She just whispered, "I lost her." Tocho didn't say, "We'll get her back." He didn't make promises. He just placed his hand in hers, rough fingers closing around her fragile ones. "I'm here," he said. That was all. It was more than enough. She healed slowly in his camp. It was hidden in the hills beyond the edge of white man's maps. He showed her how to crush yarrow for fever, how to boil bark for strength, how to listen to the forest when it whispered danger. They spoke little, but the silence between them was no longer hollow. It was safe. At night, he tended the fire while she hummed lullabies to the blanket she still held. "She's not gone," he said once without looking up. "Only misplaced," Clara laughed bitterly. "I'm a disgrace, a widow, a beggar, a fool who thought someone like you." He stopped her with a look. "I saw you before they saw you. Not the limp, not the shame. You held your child like she was holy. Even when you were burning." A tear traced down her cheek. "Why me?" Tocho looked into the fire. "Because the ones who survive the most don't always believe they deserve to be saved. They thought she was broken, but someone saw gold in the ashes. Subscribe. I promise you, tomorrow's story will prove love still lives out here." Spring bled into summer with an ache in the sky. Rain came rarely, but when it did, it soaked everything. The soil, the bones, the unspoken dreams that clung like moss to the edges of their hearts. Clara stayed. She could have gone back. She knew that, but back meant silence, shame, and a baby in someone else's arms. So she stayed in the hollow beyond the ridge, where Tocho's people once camped before the treaties cut them out of their own land. There, they started again. He built her, a roof first from pine logs and hand-carved beams, The walls went up slow because he insisted they do it right. "Strong bones don't fall," he said, pressing her palm against the wood. "Not even in storms." They cleared brush for a corral, raised chickens, caught 2 wild mustangs, and gentled them with patience instead of ropes. Clara learned to ride again. Not side saddle, but properly, legs straddling the saddle like freedom. Her limp didn't stop her, not with Tocho there, holding her waist when she lost balance, laughing gently when she cursed at the wind. One night, as the sky swirled with red and gold behind the cottonwoods, Clara placed her hand on the post of the new fence. It was rough, unfinished. So was she. But together, they were building something that no sheriff, no town, no preacher could take. Then came the letter. A writer from Dust Creek, a young girl, no older than 13, who found their camp and handed Clara a folded page with trembling fingers. The Reverend's wife had written it in haste. "Come, the child is sick, burning with fever. They say she cries for her mother in her sleep. I write this without approval. Forgive me, but I fear God more than men." Clara's hands shook. "I have to go." Tocho didn't argue. He only packed a saddlebag, handed her dried herbs and river bark. "I'll ride with you." Clara paused. "They'll kill you if they see you again." He met her eyes. "Then we ride at night." They reached the town by moonlight, ghosts in the sagebrush. They didn't approach the main road. Tocho led her behind the church, through the orchard fence, where the trees grew crooked and wild. From there, Clara slipped through the back door of the parsonage. She found June on a thin mattress, pale, sweating, her little fists curled like wilted petals. Clara crumbled. "My baby, oh my baby." She held June close, while Tocho prepared a tea in silence. The Reverend's wife watched, lips trembling, her hands wringing an old kerchief. "Some things are bigger than rules," the woman whispered. "I don't care what they say. No child should die of loneliness." Tocho cooled the tea with his breath before letting it touch June's lips. The baby whimpered once, then quieted. Not from silence, but peace. They stayed till dawn. By morning, the town knew, not from words, but from torches. The sheriff led them this time, armed with fire and fury, riding hard toward the parsonage. "We gave you warnings," he spat. "And you brought him back? That savage?" Clara stepped in front of Tocho. He saved her. Again. He tainted her. "No," she said. "You did." She didn't tremble this time. Her voice came from somewhere new, somewhere rebuilt. "I let you beat me. I let you shame me. But I will not let you steal my child's life." Tocho moved beside her, quiet as ever, a wall of earth and storm. The sheriff raised his rifle. Tocho didn't flinch. "I will not hurt you," he said. "But I won't let you hurt her either." And maybe it was the calm in his voice. Maybe it was the baby's soft, sleeping breath. But the crowd hesitated, and for the first time Clara saw it. Fear, not of Tocho, but of change, because nothing threatens the old like something pure refusing to break. You've come this far with her. You felt that, didn't you? Subscribe, and I want you to meet someone else tomorrow, someone just as forgotten. They didn't stay in Dust Creek after that, but they weren't chased either. They rode out under the same sky, now streaked with firelight and hope. They returned to the camp beyond the ridge, 3 now, not 2. And together, they built more. A porch for slow evenings, a paddock for colts, a hearth for stories and winter songs. One night, under a sky so clear it looked like spilled salt, Clara leaned against Tocho and whispered, "What if they come again?" He placed her hand on his heart. "Then we face them. With roots this time. With fire." It happened in the fall, when the earth turned golden and quiet. The hills blazed with color, and the winds carried whispers from every direction, as if the land remembered every sorrow and every song. Clara had stopped looking back. Dust Creek became a memory, blurred faces, sharpened pain. But one letter brought it all crashing forward. Again, the Reverend's wife had passed. Pneumonia. A swift, merciless winter wind. And the letter simply read, "They're rewriting the records. They're asking questions now. Maybe it's time you returned." Clara read it twice. June played in the dirt beside her, now old enough to hum to herself, little boots kicking the air like she was dancing with ghosts. Tocho was mending a saddle near the barn. His fingers, dark and calloused, worked like he was fixing something older than leather. "I want to go back," Clara said. He didn't look up. "Then we go." She smiled. "Even after everything?" He paused. "You're not going to prove anything to them?" "No," she said softly. "I just want them to see her." They arrived on a Sunday morning, just as the town bell rang. Church let out with the usual shuffle. Hats adjusted, gossip waiting to be spoken behind closed doors. But that morning, every head turned, because Clara was there, walking beside a Comanche man, holding a little girl who looked like light and earth, like both of them and neither. She didn't speak. Not yet. She just stood in the square, as if the years hadn't folded her into a different world. Whispers began. The sheriff leaned against the post. "Back to stir things up again?" he said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Clara stepped forward, placed June down gently. The child looked around, wide-eyed, but unafraid. "I didn't come for you," Clara said. "I came for her." Tocho stood beside her, hands loose, posture calm. The Reverend's new wife stepped forward, young, nervous. But she looked at June, like something holy. "I heard what you did. For her. For the child," she said to Clara, then turned to Tocho. "And for Dust Creek, when no one would." A silence fell. And then, like snow melting from a rooftop, the first nod came. Then another. Someone offered bread. Someone else muttered an apology they didn't know how to make whole. The sheriff stepped forward, unsure, but lowered his eyes. "We were wrong." Clara blinked back tears. "I know." And in that moment, Tocho stepped forward, not to defend, or not to explain her, but to take her hand, right there in the town square, under the same church bell that had tolled the hour of her shame. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Because he chose her, in front of the people who once called her Curse, in front of the sky, in front of the child they had saved together. Week later, they were married beneath the stars, not in a church, not in front of lawmen, but beneath a canopy of cottonwoods, where Tocho's people once told stories of the stars being holes punched in the sky so the ancestors could watch. Clara wore no veil, no white, just a soft blue dress and a flower June had tucked into her. Herr Tocho wore the same shirt he built her fence in. Their vows were few, just hands held, eyes locked, breath shared, and then silence. The kind that said everything. Later, as they watched June chase fireflies near the creek, Tocho whispered, "You're not who they made you out to be." Clara turned to him, her fingers resting over his. "And you're not what they feared." He looked up at the stars. "They can write what they want, but out here, you write with how you live." She leaned against his shoulder. "Then let's write something good." She was never a curse. She was someone's miracle all along. Subscribe, and let me introduce you to the next miracle tomorrow.